Hello, everyone. This is Sherry Greenhouse, Managing Partner of Serum Exchange, and I'd like to welcome you to day 3 of the QA and Analytics portion of our virtual conference. So let me introduce your presenter for today. We have Jason McKay, and Jason's Senior Product Manager for CallMiner, and he's been part of the Interaction Analytics team at CallMiner for over a decade, both as a customer on the front lines, because he was actually the customer insight analyst at a cable company before he joined CallMiner. So he understands all your pains and all your happiness of what you're doing. So he's a great person to walk us through this QA evolution because he's lived it all. And he now will help some customers. And how do you get the most out of a platform that you're using? He has an extensive background in omnichannel analytics. He understands, first call resolution, call avoidance, all the things that we go through every day. And if you look behind Jason, you may be able to see a Batman costume that he made himself. So that's pretty impressive. And I am going to turn this over to Jason, and he's going to show you how he set up his house for Halloween. So I am going to now turn my video off, and I'm going to turn this over to Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. We were talking before this started and thought it would be kind of neat to show what we do for Halloween with yesterday being the season. So we definitely have a lot of fun out here. We love to have all the kids come through. I think we had about 90 children come in, and so had toys and candy and games and all that kind of fun stuff there. All right. Yes, Nightmare Before Christmas is my favorite movie, if you can't tell, even more so than Batman behind. So hopefully everyone had an awesome Halloween. Sherry, did you want me to talk about the bat suit for 2 seconds?
Yes, yeah, I think it's great for people to understand about that bat suit. So you go ahead and do that.
Sure. So the suit behind us is, like Sherry said, it is a real suit. It is one that I built myself. And specifically, I built that one because I was doing something called cosplay for a while. Cosplay is where you dress up as a character and you go to conventions and stuff like that. I did it professionally for a while. I was a guest at 52 different conventions. Hated it. Don't recommend that to anybody who wants to do that kind of stuff. It's kind of boring. But I did meet an awesome person there who was the founder of a children's charity, and I am now the president of said children's charity. So I work for an organization called Heroic Inner Kids. What we do is we take people in costumes like Batman, and we help kids in need. So we do things like in-home visits, hospital visits. We partner with Make-A-Wish. We partner with Special Olympics. And we just really try to use our costumes in order to help children understand that there are heroes, right? So we try to bring joy and help with any type of fundraising or activities or anything like that that we can do to make children's lives better. So that's why there's a big old bat suit behind me today. All right. I don't have any close-ups of the suit right now. Maybe at the end of it, I'll bring one of the pieces up and we can look at it a little bit closer. But for now, why don't we hop into it? So we're going to talk about QA evolution today. Oh, everyone here probably already knows this, right? But what is quality assurance, right? QA is just a means of understanding what's wrong with our process. If you think about it, it works for manufacturing the similar way that it works for like your contact center, right? It's what is the oddity? What are the flaws? What are the things that are different between what we're expecting and what is reality? One of the things that I always find kind of interesting and wrap my brain around, right, is contact centers really started, it was 1958 when they started, but they really started becoming popular in the 60s. And QA as a function really didn't start taking hold until the 70s. So in the early 70s is where we start seeing quality evaluations start. Now, if you think about that, right, how many of you are doing like QA today? Like that's something that has been around now for 50 years. It really hurts me to say that, but 50 years now that people have been doing QA. And it's interesting when you think about that of what are you doing? Like how are you doing your QA? A lot of times we see that kind of play out in two different camps, right? Either I'm doing manual quality assurance, manual meaning that I've got a team of quality analysts that are going through and they're checking contacts. So we're listening to calls, we're reading transcripts from chats, whatever those different interactions that we're having, and we're filling out a form, right? Hey, I've got a yes, no, answering all these things. Or a lot of times there's this line that gets drawn and it's automated quality assurance, right? Which is what CallMiner does. So taking the transcripts and the interactions and using machine learning and AI in order to understand what's going on with those kind of interactions. So with that in mind, I have my question for you. What type of QA program do you have today? So in the chat, let me know. What are you doing from a QA side of things? Do you have manual? Do you have hybrid? Do you have automated? Manual. All right. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, right? Like I said, it's been a tried and true practice that we've seen for many, many, many years on that manual side of things. What I want to challenge you on is that, and I see a couple of folks that are starting to answer this, right? Don't always just think of it as manual and automated. What I've learned is that it's really not an or, right? You've got this concept of manual, like we talked about, that does the hands-on kind of approach, and the computer that does the computer approach. But in reality, more and more organizations are moving to a hybrid quality assurance model. Hybrid is where I got to with my organization, right? So before I worked for CallMiner, back when I was working for the cable company, we did a lot of this hybrid approach. We would do things like I had my QA team listening to the way that that CallMiner, that the computer was coming back with its categorization, and we tweak and tune based on that. So we were doing QA on the system to make sure that the system was right. Or we had tiger teams that would come in and we would listen to certain scenarios that were really important for us that were maybe outside of our norm of our quality assurance programs. So when you're thinking about QA, think about hybrid quality assurance a lot. And that's what we're going to start talking about today is what is hybrid quality assurance and what is the evolution to get there? So let's start by talking about that. Evolving quality assurance is about enhancing the quality management journey, right? And by journey, it's a journey just like any other process. The best place to start is to think about where you are in your program today, right? What are you doing? How are you doing your QA? We're going to talk about lots of ways that you can make small tweaks and changes, and I'm going to use my real life examples of how I did this in order to maybe help you start thinking that thought towards a more hybrid approach. From there, you want to incrementally improve, right? You don't want to just make the step in all at once. There may be some things you can do now. There may be ways that you can start making your changes to that. And the big thing that you've got to think about is when you make changes in your contact centers, I had a really great VP a long time ago. She used to always say that making a change in the contact center was like trying to turn the Titanic in a bathtub. You could do it, but it's not easy. It's going to take a lot of manpower, and it's going to take a lot of time to figure out how to make that change. So think of it in those terms, right? You want to be able to layer things in. You want to start getting there in the best way possible. And you want to use your QA data, right? I see so many folks that are like, I'm like, how do you use your QA data? And people are like, what do you mean? We coach our agents on it. Well, yeah, that's good, but what else could you use the data for? And we're going to talk about some real life examples that we did in order to get to some neat outcomes with our QA data. All right, $1 million question. What's the biggest challenge with your QA program today? In the chat, let's hear them. What's your biggest challenge? Simplify it into just a few words. Time, staffing, ooh. Oh, helping business partners to use the data to make strategic decisions. That's a good one. Times. Translations from the new automated system. That's interesting. Understanding what we want to measure, getting everyone in the team on the same page for scores. Hey, Ruby has no problems. That's amazing. Manual reviews. oh, I don't have one yet. That's a big piece, right? A lot of times it's time and manpower type things, right? That's what we're seeing here over and over again is trying to have that time and that manpower in order to do the QA. And that's where a lot of folks in the chat, you'll see yours talking about transitioning to an automated system. That's a lot of times what you're looking at with that is, right? It's like, how do I kind of move into more automation? It's great that you're here today because that's what we're going to be talking about. So I think the important first step, like I talked about, is thinking about where are you at, right? You're thinking about time, you're thinking about manpower, but maybe some of those answers come into some of the things that you should kind of take a step back from, right? How complex is your QA form? You ever actually thought about what value your QA form actually gives to you, right? Do you have 100 questions on it? I know my form, when I first started, we had originally about 56 questions that we had to have answered on every contact that was evaluated. And then we moved down to a smaller model, which was about 32. I'm going to tell you how we made that one even smaller. But how many questions are you having to answer? And how ambiguous are those questions, right? If your quality analyst is doing a review and they're having to ask themselves, what do I mean? What do you mean when I'm asking this question? How much time is it taking just to have someone think about, did this behavior actually happen or not? Those are easy things that you can start thinking about when you're thinking about how you're looking at making things easier, how you're getting to that more automated mindset. What does your score look like? You ever ask yourself how often an agent could get a perfect score? If an agent can't get a perfect score on your QA form, then there's something wrong with your QA form, right? It should be able to be effectively evaluated and be able to show mastery of what's going on there. And a lot of times that perfect score kind of thought is because there's a lot of caveats. Well, if you answer this question this way, then we have to answer this question this way. And if then, we have to answer another question in another way. And so you've got one piece of data that you're taking maybe 3, 4, 5 different questions to answer. What's the value in it, right? Could that have been simplified into a single question or a series of smaller questions that were easier to understand that would give you better data points, right? You want to think about your QA form and your scoring really about how do I start using this data in good ways throughout my organization. So don't just think about it as what is the thing on this form, but how am I going to be using it for? Which is where you get to what are you actually looking for, right? I think it is a fair thing to say that you should be reevaluating your QA form every 6 months, maybe a year at the most. Why do you still ask the questions that you do, right? I remember one of the first things we did was that exact exercise. We took every question that we had of those 32, or when we started with the 54, put them all on the table, and we were like, all right, why are we asking this question? And you know what the answer was to a lot of them? Well, we've always asked that question. One of them was like, did you capture the email address from the customer? Okay. The customer gave us their email address in the IVR. Why am I asking you again on the QA form if we've already got that data? It wasn't something that was being used in order to validate who the customer was. It was at one point, however many years before that, someone was like, hey, we don't have enough email addresses in the accounts. So let's add it to the QA form to make sure that people understand they need to do that. And it never left. So we were asking a question that had no value to anybody, but we were asking it just because we had that question on the form for so long, it became the norm. So you want to think, right, what value does that actually bring? Why am I asking those questions? What is the outcome from this? Is it helping my agents to move in a certain direction? Is it helping us to get certain data points in my organization? If it's not helping anything, get rid of it. You don't have to ask every question that's on your form if they aren't providing value. Oh, Stacy, this is a great one. We struggle to get operations to decide what they do want. It's easy to say what you don't want to happen, but very hard to articulate what you do in terms of relationship, interpersonal, empathy skills. That's a very good one, right? And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Like, how do you actually start determining what you do want within your QA form? And Samantha's asking, how do you make such frequent changes? We do not have IT support to update our forms. It's a real pain point. So I'm not saying that you have to always change the forms every time you evaluate them. I'm saying always question if you're still getting value, right? You may look at the form in 6 months and be like, yep, this is good. We still agree with all the questions. You may look at them in a year. Yep, this is great. And then a year and a half from now, you may be going, man, we really should ask this question. Maybe you need to add something in. Or, hey, we should take away some of these, right? You're not saying you have to change your form every so many months. I'm saying you should be challenging yourself every so many months to make sure you're asking the good questions and using that data in good ways. Good conversation so far in the chat. One thing that I want you to think about, though, is how do all these questions, how does the QA form actually affect the agent? One of the things that I learned way, way early on is that what your agent says on the phone is entirely reflective of how you're scoring them throughout your conversations or throughout your contact center, right? So let me give you an example. If you tell your agent that they need to have a low handle time, they're going to start trying to take less time on the phone. If you tell them they have to resolve things on the first contact, they're going to do whatever they can in order to resolve things on the first contact. Those two things are in counter to each other, right? It's hard to get someone off the phone as quickly as possible, but also make sure they never call back. Those two things don't usually work well together. But we oftentimes tell our agents to do that. Then we'll have a QA form that has 50 questions, 100 questions. I've had someone show me a 300 question QA form. I'm not even joking. How do you expect your agent to interpret all of that information? Not only that, but you're talking about adherence, compliance, right? Oh, you also need to make sure that you sell. Did you make sure that the customer is satisfied? How's our CSAT scores? All of these things that you throw at your agents become things that will translate into how they treat your customers. So if you're overloading your agent, if you're putting too many things on their plate at once, and this is beyond just QA, right? This is a holistic thought, then you have to understand that there is always going to be an impact to the customer side when that agent gets on the phone because they're trying to juggle all of these different things at once. Something small to keep in mind, right? I had a mentor that told me you really need to think about things as, we called it 3 balls in a pocket. What that meant is, as a human, I can juggle 3 things at once, right? I can keep 3 things up in the air. I can keep things moving. Everything's nice and great. If you give me a 4th thing, and the 3 was just a hypothetical number, but it does tend to ring true. If you give me a 4th thing, I can probably juggle that for a while, but the longer I have to juggle it, the harder it's going to become. If I have a 5th thing that gets added in, it is even harder to juggle. At 6 or 7, I can't keep those balls in the air, right? I can't continue to juggle that many things. So that's a really good way to think about what are you putting on your agents? What are you asking them to juggle? And I'm going to talk about how we kind of improve that. All right. So evolving QA functionality. I break it down into 4 parts. I'm going to tell real life examples of how I've done this in the past and how I've seen some of my customers do this even today. So revised QA forms. We've talked about that a little bit. We're going to go into a real life story about how to do that. Improve sampling, enhance calibrations, streamline the dispute process. What do these mean? Sampling is all about how are you getting your QA team to the context they need to get to. Calibration, are we all listening the same way every time, right? Or if we have an automated system, is our system giving us the right results that we're looking for? And then your dispute process. We're going to talk about disputes here in a little bit, but I'm sure everyone here has some level of dispute process that you go through with your folks in your organization. All right. So let me tell you a story. This is my real life example. I lived this one. So remember I was talking about all the things that we asked an agent to do. One of the times that we went through our QA form, we were at about 32 questions, and we really kind of took a moment to stop and said, what is it that we're looking for? What do we actually want our agents to be doing every day? And we were able to slim it down into 5 areas. Technically 4, because you were either in sales or you were in collections. You didn't do both. So that one's kind of a weird one. But we wanted to focus on customer experience, right? We wanted our customers to be happy. We wanted them to keep being our customers. That's number one for our business. To that end, we wanted to make sure that we were successful in offering products and services that met our customers' needs. Or if our customers had left and we were trying to get money from things that they had owed us, we wanted to make sure that we had our good collections outcomes, right? So either get new services or get money from services. Businesses need money in order to be successful. We wanted our agents to control the call, right? We wanted them to make sure that they were able to do things in a timely manner. That didn't necessarily mean AHT, but we wanted to make sure that we were controlling the call overall. And more importantly, we wanted to resolve issues, right? To be able to get customers to that final point. And you see a lot of these fed into that customer experience side of things. But when we actually stood back and thought about it, these were the things that were actually important to us. So then we said, well, how could we measure these things for our agents? That's where KPIs came in, right? Key performance indicators. What were the KPIs that we could look at that would tell us if we were successful in each of these areas? So you can see, right? Customer experience, that's NPS or CSAT. Did they have generated sales? What was their adherence or compliance, right? Were they taking their breaks and lunches on time? Were they handling their calls in a decent amount of time? Did they have, first call resolution rates or repeat contact counts, right? We had all these different metrics that we could use in order to measure if we were actually being effective at doing these things. So then you're like, well, yeah, we do that all the time. What's the point you're trying to make here, Jason? Well, then we took our QA form and we took every question that we had and we saw if it fit into one of those buckets, right? Were the questions we were asking on the QA form actually giving us the value points, the KPIs, the things that we wanted our agents to do, or were they not? And a lot of times they just weren't doing anything that we needed them to do. So we streamlined our forms down, right? We started really thinking about what things fit within what bucket. And these are some of my examples of different questions that we used to ask on the QA form. Now, at that point, we were in an automated model, so we were looking at from an automation side of things, but you can, but you can do that for your manual QA process as well, right? Are these questions driving value? Is this giving us something back as part of this form? So then we use that to make what I called a multi-dimensional quality form. What does that mean? Well, we made it a point to break down 4 key questions for each of those areas that we wanted someone to be proficient in. So customer experience, were they getting compliments? Was there dissatisfaction present? Did we see empathy? Did we see politeness, right? Issue resolution on the other end. Did they take ownership of the call? Did they use the right closing language? Basically, hey, don't tell people to call back. Did I help you resolve everything? Did they show confidence in the answers that they were giving? Were they using inquisitive or investigative questions, right? Basically, we broke this down to say, here's 4 key questions that you can ask or that we could ask in order to understand how someone is doing on each of the parts of the QA form. Then, when we started to have someone who had a deficiency, each of those sections was scored individually, right? So a supervisor could walk in and they could say, hey, I'm trying to coach Jason today. Where is Jason having the most problem on his quality form? And they would look at one of those 5 sections, again, 4 because the offering success and collections outcomes just depended on your department. So at my 4 sections, and they could go, hey, Jason is struggling the most with call control. That is his lowest score out of all of these. They would then dig into just that score and coach on one of those particular behaviors, one of those questions that was asked. And that would be where we would focus our time. What that meant is the agent wasn't trying to improve everything all at once, right? We were focusing into, previous screen again. Sure, I can go back one screen for you. We were really just using this to focus in on where are you having some deficiency, right? Again, maybe it was call control. Within call control, what is the one thing that we can do in order to help you get better at that? And then once we were better at that, then we'd move on to the next one, or the next one, or the next one. So our QA form still had a lot of questions on it, right? And I pull this slide back up to where we were. There's still a ton of questions here. There's 20 questions total. But when I'm coaching, I only had to coach on a specific part of it. It really gave that ability to understand what was going on and where we needed to focus our attention. That way, our QA form, what we were doing from a quality standpoint, was driving towards the success that we wanted to have. I'm going to show you how we did that in a really creative way next. So this is going to start talking about sampling and calibrations, right? So how did we pick who we monitored? How much did we monitor them? And how did we make sure that our team was aligned, that our automated system was aligned? How did we calibrate everything to make sure it was the best that it could be? So what we did is we took those two different things that we had been looking at, the operational KPI and the QA score, and we took everybody in a department and we put them on a scatter chart. So everyone was able to see exactly where everyone fell. So a supervisor could look at this for their team, and they knew which quadrant their team fell into. Now we made these sliding scales. What does that mean? It means that every month we took the bottom performer and the highest performer, and that was the lowest or upper and lower control limits for each axis on this chart. It meant that we were constantly sliding our scale as appropriate with our contact center because we wanted to keep driving success. So within those four quadrants, right, it became real easy to understand what was going on. In the very bottom quadrant, that was people that were not performing. Why were they not performing? They were not getting results, so their operational KPIs were low, and they weren't using the language on the call that would get the results. I used to call those my no-bees, right? Same mentor used to tell me that you had three type of people that in your organization. You had your bees, your can bees, and your no bees. Your bees are the people that are doing the job the way you want them to do it and are going to continue to do the job the way that you want them to do it, right? They just understand what to do. They get things done. Your can bees are people that want to do the job, but they just don't know how to do it right. You can train your can bees. You can get those can bees to become bees. Then you had your no bees, and that was the folks in your organization that just you didn't want to spend as much, or you spent a ton of time on because they weren't performing, they weren't doing the things they needed to, and you would try to beat them over the head trying to get them to change. But at some point, they're not going to change, right? A lot of times your no bees don't want to be there in the first place. And so, funny enough, in most organizations, you spend all your time coaching your no bees when really your can bees are the ones that you should be really spending a lot of time with. So we use this chart to help with that kind of thought, right? Not performing, that was our no bees. We gave them some attention, but we didn't focus on them as much. The next box over, coaching opportunities. That particular area is where we coached a ton. What that meant is they were people that were using the language on the call, but they were not getting results. An example of that, right? If I was, let's say it was an offer, right? So let's say the operational KPI was generated sales, QA score was my sales effectiveness. Maybe they're doing something like putting the offer in the wrong part of the call, right? If it was a tech support department, they're offering at the very end after we've resolved all the issues. Fundamentally, that's a 40% less likely that you're going to get a sale at that point. That's easy. I can coach them to do that in a different part of the call. Or they're saying the language, but they're doing it really flat. Hey, you know we offer internet for $20 a month. You want some of that today? Like, nobody's going to buy that, but they're at least using the language. I can coach you up on that. That's my can bees. And a lot of times what we would do is that quadrant up, those performers, those are our folks that we would start looking at to help coach our coaching opportunities, our can bees. So we were using our bees in order to help our can bees get better, to make our supervisors' lives easier. That way, all of that became very cyclical. So everybody was growing and improving. That all makes sense, right? 3 quadrants, B's, no B's, can B's, we're good to go. Except for that blue square at the top corner, the learning opportunities. This square is where I spent all of my time with my QA team, with my supervisors. We spent a lot of effort on those folks. You want to know why? Because they're the learning opportunities. It says so on the slide. But what do I mean by learning opportunities? Well, it meant one of two things, right? So these were folks that showed results with a KPI. So let's go sales, right? Sales is the easy example. They were having sales that were happening, but their QA scores were low. We weren't finding the language of the sale going on. And so one of two things was happening. Either one, they were cheating. They were adding on products and services in a sales example that they shouldn't have without telling the customer what they were doing. Or if it was call control, they were ending calls early and just dropping the line on the customers, right? They were exhibiting behaviors that were not tolerated in our contact centers. Those were folks that we had to exit. We had to get them out of the organization, but we had to know how to find them, and this chart helped us to find them. Or the other side of this is they were folks that were doing ways in such creative means that we weren't even asking the right questions on the QA forms. We weren't even using our automated system in the right way to understand what they were doing. I used to have a guy, he was an older gentleman, his name was John. John was just, I live in Texas, right? So he just had a very deep Southern Texas accent. His voice was a little bit bassy. And when he would talk, he's one of those people you just listen to. He just had a real nice tone and nice pace in the way he would talk. He would conversate. And when you're listening to him from a QA standpoint, man, he had the best conversations with customers. And then all of a sudden he was entering in an offer. And you're like, oh, crap, man, he's not doing something wrong. But you listen to John, and John was doing everything right. He was making that sale in that example into part of the conversation. He was talking about what he liked about the product and, hey, have you tried this and you're doing this? It was a conversation that was happening to build towards that sale. That was a learning opportunity for us, right? I wanted a dozen of people like John because he was doing things in a way that was more creative and more effective than everybody else in my call center. But if I had never stopped to call out that he was in that top quadrant, I would never have known to listen to him any different than anybody else. And if all I did was look at the QA score by itself, John would have failed and he would have been exited from the organization. Because although he was a top performer in the sales side, he was not great at his QA score. And as a matter of fact, when we intervened, when we started this process, John was on a written warning because his QA scores were so low. I don't want to get rid of the people like that, right? The score is never the full story. Exactly, Brittany. You got to think outside of that. So I challenge you to think about QA and the QA data three-dimensionally, right? How do I put all of this data together in order to get more efficient overall? Where do I spend my time when we're actually listening? Like I said, however we built this chart out the first month, the next month, that's where we swarmed and we spent more time with those folks. We had, of course, minimums that we had to meet for everybody, but we really did spend more focus on that top quadrant in order to understand what they were doing. So the dispute process. I'm sure everyone has a dispute process, right? You have the QA that happens and you either send it to the supervisor or the agent and something has to happen along the way, right? And everybody doesn't always think that things are peachy keen and everything's great. How many of your dispute processes look something similar to this, right? You start with the quality analyst does the QA. Maybe it gets sent to the supervisor. Maybe it gets sent to the agent. There's some conversations that happen. Agent sends it to QA. QA sends it back to supervisor. Who sends it back to QA. Who sends it to the agent. And it becomes this string of just, you ever like have Christmas lights where you're like going through and you like pull them out of the garage? I did this just recently decorating for Halloween. I pulled out a strand of lights and I'm like, how is it in such a tangled mess that I can't get it untangled when I rolled it up perfectly, right? My process to put it in the garage was perfect. I rolled them up, I had them set one on top of the other, and then I pull them out of the box and it's just a mess. That's what a lot of dispute processes, right? Or alignments, right? Revision requests, those are great names for it. But it's really because ultimately someone doesn't agree or understand it's out of alignment. So how do you make the process better? Well, you got to put better guardrails around it, right? What does that mean? Option one, get real specific about who goes to who for what part of the process. So quality analysts could always send their QAs to the supervisor. Supervisor has to review before sending to the agent. If supervisor has a dispute or when they're doing their first pass on it says, hey, this isn't right, they start that first circle to the left. Supervisor QA keep talking until they're on the same page. Then supervisor is able to talk to the agent and have that nice conversation with the agent, right? So being able to keep that kind of compartmentalized in that direction is one way that you can go about it, right? You keep your QA where they're not contacting the agent directly. The supervisor, exactly like Sue is saying right here, right? Agent does not contact QA agent directly. Goes to team lead, will contact QA. If still dispute, does to a panel, right? So you're keeping it segmented. You're keeping it kind of apart that way. That's one way in order to become more efficient in the dispute process. The other way is to bypass the supervisor or team lead altogether. And we actually went to this model in my contact center. So the quality analyst was responsible for coaching the agent. The agent would dispute back to the quality analyst, but they could ask their supervisor questions in between. This one can be a little bit harder to do because your supervisor and QA have to both be thinking about things the same direction, right? If question on the form says, offer made, then both of those parties have to know what offer made meant. So you might need to start with option one before you move into option two. But the really important thing here to keep in mind is you should be tracking every step of this dispute process. What do I mean by that? You should think about what tools do you have on hand that you can use in order to have a paper trail for your dispute processes. How are people interacting with each other? Who's interacting where? What are the steps in the process? Where do they start breaking down? If you've got this, if you're doing something similar to option two and you're like, man, it's a mess, go back and think about, hey, maybe we should try option one. But keep track of all of it, right? Make sure that it is in a form where you're able to see for this QA, this was the questions that were asked. That's part of the overall QA process, just like everything else. A lot of times that tracking, like what actually happened, is thrown on the floor somewhere and no one knows what actually ever occurred. So make sure you're tracking what's going on. It's a big fundamental step in the right direction. All right. So with all that in mind, let me ask you, where do you want to start evolving your QA process? If you took one thing away from today, what do you feel like would be the one thing that you could go start actioning on or start thinking about tomorrow? Put it in the chat. Let's hear it. Revise QA forms. That's a great first step. Revise your forms, right? Think about those forms. How are they done? Tracking the dispute process. Thank you. That's a big one, right? Dispute process is low-hanging fruit. Yep, there's always one of these things is probably low-hanging fruit in your organization that you could start doing immediately that would help you to be better overall. Oh, the quadrant reporting. That's probably one of my most favorite charts I ever created in my entire life, let me tell you, Stacy. So now I'm going to take you into the future, all right? I don't know if you're old enough, but back before the year 2000, Conan O'Brien just used to have a skit, in the year 2000, and anyway. No, not with the DeLorean. My son wants a DeLorean, oddly enough. But I'm going to talk to you about where you go from here. So let's say you've gone through and you've done all of these things. What then do you start benefiting from? Where does this start giving you more payout throughout your organization? I've got two different stories that I want to tell around this. The first one is QA and staffing. So I don't know if you've ever done a time study before, but once we moved into this new version of what we were doing, we were using automation in order to understand what was happening on 100% of our contacts. So we were very highly effective there. Again, you can do this with your existing stuff. We started looking at what were our QA scores in each of those quadrants, right? Or not quadrants, but each of the sub-scores at during different times of the day for different departments. Why is that important? Well, because we found that there were certain lagging trends that would happen. So first thing in the morning, 8 a.m., scores would be pretty decent. They'd go up a little bit by 10 a.m. And guess what? For a lot of people, at noon, scores would drop. Why do you think they would drop at noon? Probably because people were trying to go to lunch. They were hungry. They weren't engaged at that point because they wanted to get off the phone. So their scores were dropping. They weren't doing the things that they should do. And then at 1 o'clock, they'd start building back up again, right? Get to 2 o'clock. And then we saw another drop at 3. What's that drop? That's the same one I get every day, right? I have to have my caffeine at like 3 o'clock because I need to have something perk me up. I do not do great in the afternoon. I'm a morning person. Get me going. That's my next break. I need to get in and do that. So you have a lift and then a huge drop right at 5 because everybody's ready to go home. And nobody wants to be there anymore. You get sloppy during those times, right? Breaks, lunches, quitting time. That's the times where you're not as engaged. So when we started tracking our data this way, we started looking at QA by person, by department, and we started seeing trends within there. What we did is we used that data to inform our staffing better. Staffing a lot of times used to always just be, hey, do I have enough people on the phone to hit service level? But then we started using an extra dimension to that. So do I have enough people on the phone to do service level that can offset the lower performance of some of the folks that maybe are going into a break or a lunch? So our second shift would come in at 11 at that point. Let's get some more people on the phone in order to try to get better overall scores, to try to get more folks engaged, and maybe take that 12 o'clock lunchtime and move it up just a little bit so people aren't so hangry before they get to that time of day, right? It became a new way that we could look at staffing. How do you interact? How do you slot people in most effectively in order to cover and make sure that you are the most effective that you can be throughout the day? Law of averages, right? Get the best performance you can at any given time. All right, my last story. How many of you, I don't have this as a question slide, but have you ever used QA to figure out if someone was going to exit your organization? Ooh, say more. Oh, Sue is right on this. Kinda. All right. Let me tell you what we found out. And this was long before the term silent quitters came in, right? It's been a long time now. We noticed that there was some trends with QA. And specifically, QA was a precursor to somebody leaving our organization. And it usually always aligned with 2 different data points. We had to look at, again, 3-dimensionally. QA becomes one part of your data in a bigger, broader picture. Take that as your takeaway, right? QA is the bigger portion. You can use this data throughout. The more data you have, the better it is, the more richer it becomes. So what did we find? We found that if 2 events happened, we had people that would leave every single time. What were those 2 events? Well, they would be a mid-performer, somebody that was going through and they're performing okay. They're doing what we want. They're not like super high, top of the line, but they're not like our no Bs either, right? That's our can be, lower end B kind of persona. They would be performing great for a long time. Side note, just so you're aware, we also did another study. I don't think I have it on here, but 2 years is the effectiveness time for an agent. I don't know if you know that, but for our organization, if an agent was in the same position for more than 2 years, their performance would always move into that mid-low range and would not change at that point unless they got a different position. So either we moved them to another department or we promoted them up. So that's a topic for another day. Either way, what we had here, we had the quality scores would be midline, right? These would be people that were coming in every day, though. So they were not getting a lot of attendance points. We used attendance points in order to determine if somebody was showing up the way they were supposed to. So I'm not having any attendance problems. I'm doing good, maybe not great, but I'm doing good, kind of moderate in my scores. And then we would see a score drop. And if we went and looked, we would see that there was a spike in attendance points. So what happened when attendance points spiked? Well, if all of a sudden you got a bunch of points, our organization immediately put you on a written warning. So we had people that had been performing how we wanted them to perform for sometimes several years that had a life event happen, and then they got written up. First time ever for a lot of these folks. Those folks, if they had been with our organization longer than a year, in 3 months they left every single time. If they'd been with us less than a year, then it was typically closer to 1 month and they would be gone. Sometimes 0 months, they just left as soon as they got that written warning. But it was interesting, right? Why do people just leave all of a sudden when they get a bunch of attendance points? They have a life event happen, their scores tank, and they just give up. Well, what we found out was, one, these are people that had never been written up. They weren't expecting that. And two, I want you to think about this, the only way an agent had to take points off if they had a life event was they either had to, A, wait them out. What do I mean by wait them out? Points dropped off after 6 months of no other points being accrued. So you have something that happens like, oh my gosh, my car just broke down and I'm having to use the bus to get to work and it's making me late. I haven't figured out my schedule yet. Or my kid's sick and I'm having to take some time off because I don't have somebody that can help care for them, a life event that was happening. And they had to just suck it up for 6 months and hope that they could get all their points taken off. Option two was you could work overtime, and as you worked overtime, certain times of the year, you could reduce your points from your attendance scores. So you're telling me that I have a sick kid at home, and in order to make this better, you need me to spend more time here when I can't devote that time to the office. I need to have this time at home. We actually challenged that entire paradigm and said, why? Why would we do that to people? When we have people that are performing, why wouldn't we incentivize performance versus attendance? So if you have a life event, if your scores are at a 5, we did a 1 to 5 scale for our scoring. If you are scoring 5s on stuff, we give you points back automatically. I don't care if you're late a couple of times. If you're treating my customers well and you're selling and you are handling things the way that we need you to and you're doing all of those 4 behaviors, awesome. Keep doing those. I want to incentivize you to come back. If you had a 2 or a 4, you got a little bit less points, but you got some points because you're still performing better than average. 3, you got a little bit, but not as much. But it reaffirmed the behaviors that we wanted folks to use, right? Remember that slide from way back earlier, the 5 key behaviors that we felt were important for our contact center. We used that as the driving force. The front of that ship that we were trying to turn in the bathtub was always those 5 behaviors. And everything we did, we used that as our guiding light. And it changed the way that our organization worked for the better. We had happier customers, we had happier employees, and overall it fixed problems like this. All right. So my challenge for you as you leave here is think about transforming your QA experience, right? The old way, you don't optimize and utilize QA the way that you should, right? You're doing it without any significance. You've got agents that are overwhelmed by the forms. You've got quality analysts that are overwhelmed by the forms. You're not doing good targeted coaching. You're all over the place, right? Get it structured. Figure out your guiding lights. Figure out where you can start making those improvements, right? Remember, revisit your QA forms. Think about how you sample the contacts. Think about how you do calibrations. Think about your dispute process. Those are your first fundamental steps that you can do in order to get there. From there, how am I using that data? How can I make the data do things that I need the data to do? And since I am a coal miner employee, I will tell you this. I personally own and manage a product that we call Coach, which is all about this process that I'm talking about. How do we coach and QA the most effectively? So please come visit our booth and learn more about our Coach product that can help you with that if you're interested. With that, Sherry, I am.
Okay, thank you. Great. That was a great session. Love your stories. Lots of great interaction with our audience. If there's, let's see, if there's any more questions, I know you did a wonderful job of picking them up as you were going through. Early on, you asked if people were doing manual or automated, and I would say it looked like real quickly 90% said manual.
Yep.
So
Yep.
just, I'm wondering, for those of you that said manual, is it because you feel that the group is too small to be automated? Is it a cost thing? What's some of the reasons you're still manual, or you feel like we're good, we can handle it? Cost. Okay. That came up quickly. Christina, it's cost.
I feel like Christina has probably looked at this and
Yeah.
she's trying to figure out the ratios there.
Cost, and they have 21 agents. Okay. Yeah, so I had a feeling it was probably cost. I really want to say the good news is Jason's giving everything away for free today, but I can't say that.
I'll do that, unfortunately. If I could, I would.
Yeah. If it was April 1st, I could say it, but I can't say it today. Support dollars, trouble selling the idea to management, trying to sell. Yeah, Jason, do you have any kind of ROI that you can help people with?
Yeah, we actually do pretty in-depth ROI modeling. So if it's cost, it's your concern or things like that, please come talk to some of the folks, come visit our booth. We actually do side-by-side ROI modeling with you to help you to see if the ratio, so the benefit to cost is worth it for you in order to make the changeover. I will say I saw one, I think Sue said on there, like time to transition, 300 agents and 2 call centers. I feel that, right? I had 5 call centers. Each call center had on average 200 to 300 employees. It is a bit of a beast to get towards. But when you start thinking about QA like we talked about throughout this entire slide, a lot of times the benefits start showing up for them. They feel heard. They feel listened to, right? One of the big challenges I always see from the QA side of things is like, you picked the one call where I didn't do something right. Well, but I can tell you every other call where you did things where that you did things the same way. So sometimes it's worth it. And keep in mind, if you do have manual and you've got a small center, you can streamline those processes and you could get to more data, right? Ultimately, it's all about getting that good data.
Yeah. Cost and management. And I know, and Jason, I'm sure you know, everybody's a little bit of a cost crunch these days. So it's, and it looks like, I don't remember, somebody said, yeah, this is the second time we're doing an ROI. So I know everybody appreciates the value, but sometimes the timing isn't correct.
Yep.
It was great. It was great ideas to some of those slides were great to look at what you can do and how you can approach things even in a manual environment.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Great session. We have a session this afternoon at 2 where Vicki Harrell's going to go through some trends and what's going on with the QATC. She did a survey of the Quality Assurance and Training Connection audience and has some survey results. So if you have not yet signed up for that session, you can go ahead and we will see you at 2 Eastern. So thank you to everyone that attended today. Thank you, Jason. Great presentation. And we will see you all at 2.